They thought they could do it in silence, behind closed doors, without votes, without scrutiny. But now the truth is out. The Supreme Court has just exposed the darkest secret of Keir Starmer's leadership. A covert attempt to realign Britain with the European Union, sidestepping democracy and defying the will of millions who voted for Brexit. What was once whispered in confidential memos and buried in legal jargon has now exploded into the public eye, and the fallout is nothing short of catastrophic. This isn't just about technicalities. This is about trust, sovereignty, and a betrayal so deep it has shattered the very foundations of the Labour Party. Starmer's mask has slipped, and what lies beneath is sparking a political firestorm. The Supreme Court's ruling dropped like a bomb on Westminster, stunning MPs and sending shockwaves through every corner of British politics. At the heart of the court's decision was a scathing indictment of Keir Starmer's secretive campaign to push the UK back into alignment with EU regulations, without the knowledge or consent of Parliament. The justices were unambiguous. Starmer's use of executive authority to bypass legislative scrutiny and implement EU-aligned policy changes was unlawful, unconstitutional, and incompatible with democratic norms. With those words, the highest court in the land not only struck down a clandestine plan, but also tore apart the carefully constructed image Starmer had sold to the British people. A man of law, of process, of principled leadership. Behind the scenes, this was no accident. The court found evidence of deliberate coordination between Starmer's office and a network of senior advisors with deep roots in Brussels and the Blairite political class. The goal was simple but dangerous: to gradually reintroduce EU regulatory standards into British law under the guise of technical updates and international cooperation. The language used was deceptively tame. Phrases like regulatory, harmonisation, and economic alignment. But what the documents revealed was far more explosive. These were sweeping policy shifts negotiated without public debate or parliamentary approval, crafted to take effect slowly enough to escape public outrage. Until now. For months, ordinary Britons had been left in the dark. Starmer's team operated under a veil of secrecy, relying on obscure policy briefings and hidden legal clauses to advance their agenda. Parliamentary briefings were kept vague, the press was given sanitised summaries, and Labour MPs, especially those representing Leave-supporting constituencies, were fed talking points that masked the truth. They were told that this was about economic growth, about modern cooperation with our neighbours. But those words now ring hollow. The court exposed how entire industries were being prepared for realignment with EU rules, from environmental standards to food production regulations, without a single vote in the Commons. The response from inside the Labour Party has been nothing short of furious. Backbench MPs, already uneasy about Starmer's increasingly centralised leadership, feel humiliated. They were never consulted, never warned. Instead, they stood before their constituents and defended policies they didn't fully understand. Policies that have now been revealed to be part of a secret re-entry strategy into the EU's orbit. One MP, speaking anonymously to the press, called it a stab in the back. Another described it as the worst betrayal of our voters since the referendum. The backlash is not limited to words. Labour's internal infrastructure is starting to crack. Emergency meetings have been called. Constituency parties are demanding answers. And senior figures within the party are whispering about the unthinkable, a challenge to Starmer's leadership. Out on the streets, the reaction has been just as volatile. Protesters gathered outside Parliament within hours of the court's decision. Union Jacks waved high, banners decrying betrayal, chants calling for Starmer to resign. Across social media, fury erupted as screenshots of the court's ruling spread like wildfire. Thousands shared videos of the judgment being read, highlighting passages where the justices condemned the abuse of executive power. Prominent Brexit campaigners weighed in, accusing Starmer of waging war on the people's vote and plotting a silent return to the EU. For many, this was confirmation of long-held suspicions that despite his public promises to respect Brexit, Starmer had always planned to reverse it through stealth. The Prime Minister's silence only made matters worse. While the nation reeled from the ruling, Starmer remained invisible. No press conference, no direct statement. Instead, his office issued a carefully worded press release describing the decision as a difference in legal interpretation. But that narrative collapsed almost immediately. Legal scholars shredded it in televised debates, pointing out that the ruling wasn't about legal nuance, it was about democratic accountability. The court made it clear, Starmer's government had overstepped constitutional boundaries, attempted to rewrite UK law without a parliamentary mandate, and acted in a way that was fundamentally incompatible with the principles of British democracy. The stakes are enormous. This ruling has not only triggered a legal and political crisis, it has become a defining moment for Starmer's premiership. He positioned himself as a man who would clean up politics, who would lead with integrity and restore trust. But the court's judgment paints a very different picture. A leader willing to conceal, to manipulate, and to govern from the shadows. For the first time since taking office, Starmer's authority is being openly questioned by his own party, and many are wondering whether he can survive the storm that is now rapidly gathering around him. As the dust begins to settle from the Supreme Court's devastating judgment, the fallout has morphed into a full-blown political inferno. Inside Labour headquarters, the mood is grim, the tension palpable. Starmer's closest aides are scrambling to contain the damage, but it's too late. The ruling has not only shattered the illusion of a stable leadership, it has sparked a domino effect that threatens to tear the party apart from within. With leaked memos, furious resignations, and whispers of rebellion swirling through the corridors of Westminster, Labour is now teetering on the edge of internal collapse. Starmer, once seen as the steady hand guiding the party out of post-Corbyn chaos, now finds himself presiding over the very chaos he promised to end. Backbenchers, particularly those from Leave voting strongholds, feel betrayed to their core. These MPs, many of whom took political risks to back Starmer's leadership despite local scepticism, are now paying the price for his covert EU agenda. Constituents are calling their offices in outrage, demanding answers. Local party branches are holding emergency meetings, passing motions of no confidence and pressuring their MPs to disown Starmer's actions. Some MPs are facing threats of deselection, while others have reportedly begun drafting resignation letters. The betrayal is personal, and it cuts deep. For years, Labour has struggled to rebuild trust in its traditional heartlands, and now that trust has been annihilated overnight, leaked emails from Starmer's inner circle have only poured fuel on the fire. One memo, obtained by a national broadsheet, reveals that senior strategists had devised a communication plan to deliberately downplay the scope of the EU alignment policies. MPs were instructed to refer to the changes as technical adjustments and were warned not to use terms like EU compliance or Brussels standards. The goal, according to the memo, was to minimise potential backlash from constituencies with historic Leave majorities. The revelation has enraged MPs who now realise they were not only misled, but used as shields to protect Starmer's image, while the leadership plotted behind closed doors. Adding to the fury, a second memo shows that preliminary talks with EU officials had been underway for nearly a year. Draft regulatory frameworks had already been exchanged, covering everything from trade to agriculture, with some proposals so detailed that they included clause-by-clause comparisons of UK and EU law. This wasn't hypothetical planning, this was operational groundwork. Some departments within the civil service had already been instructed to prepare for regulatory transition, despite the absence of any parliamentary vote or public announcement. The Supreme Court ruling didn't just derail a plan. It exposed a government in waiting acting as though it already had unilateral control over the future of British law. The media, sensing blood in the water, has turned ruthless. Front pages across the country scream betrayal, deception, and constitutional crisis. Starmer's approval ratings have plummeted in snap polls, and public trust in Labour's leadership is collapsing. Opinion pieces that once praised his calm demeanour now condemn his duplicity. Political commentators, both left and right, are describing this as one of the most serious breaches of democratic protocol in modern British history. Meanwhile, opposition parties have seized the moment with fury. The Conservatives have launched a relentless media blitz, accusing Labour of plotting to reverse Brexit and undermine British sovereignty. Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, has gone even further, demanding Starmer's resignation and calling for an immediate general election. Inside Labour, the question now is not whether there will be consequences, but how severe they will be. Senior members of the shadow cabinet are split. Some are standing behind Starmer publicly, but expressing doubts privately. Others are preparing for a leadership crisis. Rumours of a coordinated challenge are growing louder, with whispers that several influential MPs are gauging support for a motion to trigger a leadership contest. One source, close to a prominent Labour figure, claimed that the dam has broken, there's no going back. A leadership challenge, once unthinkable, is now not just possible but increasingly probable. The first resignation came from a junior shadow minister who had spent years defending Labour's new direction in post-Brexit Britain. In a scathing letter that quickly went viral, she wrote, "I joined Labour to fight for working people, not to deceive them. This government in waiting has failed to uphold the principles of transparency and accountability that we demand from our opponents. Her departure triggered a chain reaction. Within 48 hours, 2 more junior ministers stepped down, citing similar concerns. Meanwhile, high-profile backbenchers have begun publicly criticising Starmer's leadership on live television, using phrases like authoritarian drift, Brexit betrayal, and constitutional abuse. The internal rebellion is no longer a whisper, it's a roar. The chaos has reached Labour's financial base as well. Major donors, already uneasy with the party's direction, are now reportedly reviewing their contributions. One longtime supporter has paused a 7-figure donation, stating, "We were sold a vision of ethical leadership. This is anything but." At least 3 trade unions are rumoured to be preparing public statements demanding greater accountability from the leadership, with some threatening to withhold support unless a full investigation is launched. The financial and institutional backbone of Labour is beginning to buckle under the strain. And through it all, Starmer has remained largely invisible. His public appearances have been limited to pre-recorded messages and vague statements that avoid addressing the substance of the court ruling. He has not stood before Parliament, he has not taken unscripted questions from the press, and he has certainly not apologised. His silence, once perceived as calmness and control, now reads as weakness and guilt. Each day that passes without a full explanation only intensifies the backlash. Even his allies are beginning to question whether he understands the gravity of what's unfolding, or whether he's simply hoping to ride out the storm until the news cycle moves on. But this storm is not passing, it is gathering force. The Supreme Court ruling has triggered something deeper than a policy dispute. It has awakened a long-simmering distrust among voters, a fear that the political class never truly respected the Brexit vote, and that even now, years later, efforts are still underway to reverse it by stealth. That fear has now found a face in Keir Starmer, and no amount of spin or legal nuance can put the genie back in the bottle. The betrayal has been documented in court, the damage has been done, and the reckoning has begun. What started as a secret alignment plan has now become a political reckoning. With Parliament in uproar, the public enraged, and Labour spiralling into disarray, the question hanging over Westminster is chilling in its simplicity. How much longer can Keir Starmer survive? As resignations pile up and murmurs of rebellion swell into full-blown revolt, the fate of Labour's leadership, and perhaps the future of British politics itself, hangs by a thread. The clock is ticking, and Starmer's time may be running out. As the tidal wave of fury continues to crash through the corridors of Westminster, the crisis around Keir Starmer has deepened into an existential threat for the Labour Party. Passing hour, new revelations emerge, leaked documents, insider testimonies, and damning analysis, all confirming what many feared. Starmer not only sanctioned, but actively orchestrated a covert campaign to realign Britain with the European Union without public knowledge or parliamentary approval. This was not the misstep of a confused leader. It was a deliberate strategy carried out under a cloak of secrecy, and the consequences are nothing short of seismic. Labour, once riding high in the polls, is now convulsing under the weight of its own deception. The party that promised to restore honesty and integrity has instead been exposed as a machine of manipulation and quiet betrayal. Momentum within Labour has all but evaporated. Dozens of MPs have now signed a joint letter demanding an emergency parliamentary session to interrogate Starmer's actions, insisting that no leader, Labour or otherwise, should be allowed to bypass Parliament on matters as critical as sovereignty and legal alignment. The letter, which includes signatures from both centrist MPs and longtime critics of Starmer, represents a cross-factional mutiny unseen in recent political memory. Meanwhile, the shadow cabinet is reportedly fractured, with ministers splitting into rival camps, those still clinging to Starmer's leadership in the hope of survival, and those openly preparing for his downfall. Several ministers have gone completely silent, avoiding public appearances and dodging media inquiries, fueling speculation that a mass walkout could be imminent. Outside Westminster, the rage is even more visceral. In Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, and countless towns across England, protests are growing in size and intensity. What began as Brexit supporter rallies have evolved into broader anti-establishment movements. Posters with slogans like "Traitor Starmer out" and "Restore Democracy Now" plaster city walls. Social media is ablaze with calls for action. Petitions demanding Starmer's resignation have garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures within days, and former Labour supporters are publicly burning their membership cards. The sense of betrayal is raw and potent, and it's spreading. The Reform UK party, sensing a political vacuum, has capitalised on the chaos with ruthless precision. Nigel Farage, in a televised address that went viral overnight, declared, "Keir Starmer has committed the greatest act of political deceit since the Brexit vote. He tried to reverse history behind closed doors. Now it's time to reverse him. Farage's words struck a chord with millions, who feel that their vote to leave the EU has been treated as an inconvenience by the political elite. Reform UK's polling numbers have surged, especially in Leave-dominated regions, threatening to strip Labour of its fragile hold over key battleground constituencies. In fact, early data now suggests that Labour's majority in at least 30 red wall seats is at serious risk. Inside Downing Street, the Prime Minister's office is watching the Labour implosion with a mix of strategic caution and opportunistic glee. While publicly calling for calm and respect for democratic institutions, Conservative strategists have quietly begun crafting a narrative that frames their party as the true guardian of Brexit. They are preparing to go on the offensive, reminding voters at every turn that Labour, under Starmer, tried to sell Britain back to Brussels while lying to the electorate. One senior Tory aide, speaking anonymously, remarked, "Starmer has given us a gift. He's destroyed the perception of Labour as honest brokers. Now all we have to do is drive that message home." As for Keir Starmer, his attempts at damage control have fallen flat. In his first public address since the Supreme Court ruling, he spoke in carefully scripted phrases, avoided direct questions, and dismissed the entire scandal as a misunderstanding of legal terminology. But the public was not buying it. Political commentators slammed the speech as tone-deaf, evasive, and insulting to the intelligence of the British people. One veteran journalist commented live on air, "This was Starmer's moment to take responsibility, to apologise, to level with the country. Instead, he chose to gaslight them. And that may be the final nail in the coffin of his leadership." Even within Labour HQ, the narrative is disintegrating. Staffers have begun leaking internal Slack messages and emails that show frantic efforts to reshape media strategy. At one point, a senior advisor suggested downplaying the entire episode by shifting public attention to an unrelated policy announcement, an economic growth plan. The suggestion was met with disbelief. "You think we can bury a constitutional crisis with a tax incentive speech?" one employee replied. The leadership's failure to grasp the seriousness of the situation has now become part of the scandal itself. The Labour machine, once praised for its discipline and media control, is now sputtering under the weight of panic and confusion. Amidst the political chaos, legal experts are issuing grave warnings. Several constitutional scholars have stressed that the Supreme Court's ruling sets a critical precedent that could trigger more judicial reviews into government actions, not just for Labour, but for future administrations. There is now a renewed call for formal limitations on executive power, with some MPs pushing for emergency legislation to prevent any future leader from enacting significant regulatory or foreign policy shifts without a vote in the House of Commons. What Starmer has inadvertently done is reignite the debate over the very structure of British democracy, forcing a reckoning not just within Labour, but across the entire political system. And yet, the most devastating damage may be to the idea of trust. Trust in leadership, trust in parties, trust in the system. Voters who once returned to Labour in hopes of a steadier hand after years of Brexit turmoil and pandemic politics now feel they were tricked. Constituency polling shows a steep decline in trust ratings for Starmer personally, even among core Labour demographics like urban professionals and young voters. The youth vote, once seen as a bedrock of Starmer's strategy, has splintered, with many expressing feelings of disillusionment and betrayal. The idea that Labour could present a clear and united alternative to the Conservatives is rapidly unravelling. With each revelation, the crisis deepens. More memos, more resignations, more protests. Party insiders are now openly speculating whether Starmer can even survive until the next general election. And if he does, what kind of Labour Party will remain? Will it still be united under his banner, or will it be fractured beyond repair, split between angry traditionalists and disillusioned moderates, torn between principle and power? The countdown has begun, and the pressure is only intensifying. As it stands, the Labour Party is locked in a storm of its own making, one born of secrecy, arrogance, and an underestimation of the British public's demand for transparency. Starmer's covert EU plan, once hidden in the shadows of legal jargon and internal memos, now lies in plain view for the entire nation to judge. And the verdict, already forming in the hearts and minds of millions, may prove to be far more damning than anything written by the justices of the Supreme Court. The question now is not whether Starmer's leadership will survive, but whether Labour itself can survive the wreckage he has left behind. Britain stands at a crossroads, and now more than ever, your voice matters. If you believe in democracy, transparency, and the right of the people to decide their nation's future, don't stay silent. Share this video. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe Keir Starmer should resign? Should there be an immediate general election? Should the Supreme Court's ruling spark a wider investigation? Make your voice heard. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel for breaking updates. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss what happens next. The media may try to spin this, the establishment may try to bury it, but together we can expose the truth. This is Britain Nexus, where your voice cuts through the noise.